Venues Ōtautahi, do you want to come up to the table? Can we get a chair for Brent? There's a, yeah. You've made the effort to come in, Brent. You might as well sit with. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Great, thanks for coming in. And I think everyone knows everyone, don't they? You've got Caroline, Danny, Gil, and Brent Ford, who's on the board.
Caroline, Danny, Gil, and Brent.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just start with a couple of sentences of introduction. Thank you very much for having us here. We think it's important that we report to you on our annual report, but also give you a glimpse into the future, because particularly this sector, it's all about what's happening in the future. You've got the material. I think Caroline and Danny will go through it reasonably quickly, not every word on it, but you'll get that material for you to look at. It's been a really good year for us. It hasn't always been as easy financially as previous years against target, but I think the team's done exceptionally well in terms of reinvigorating the city post the period that, you know, everyone went through post-COVID, etc. And we're now back full on song. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline and ask her to take us through the presentation, then it will be open for questions. Caroline.
Lovely, thanks, Gil. See you all again. Look, we'll obviously move through both our FY 23-24 annual report highlights, as well as look to Q1 of 24-25, noting that we don't have a huge amount of time. So I'll just focus on some of those successes, but also some of those constraints that we see, particularly when we look back at FY 23-24 around some of those, the bit of volatility that we've had in the economic environment. So 23-24 obviously was a more challenging year when it came to our cost pressures, particularly with respect to those uncontrollable costs around asset management and maintenance. We've always flagged that throughout the year, those large increases when it came to utilities, the living wage and insurance particularly. But we'll get firstly into some highlights, because operationally it was a great year really. So you'll see obviously we've exceeded all of those targets, 386 events, 642,000 guests, which is awesome, against our target of 450,000. So the fact that our community is out there getting together, enjoying their venues, and those venues our city is so proud to own and we're so privileged to manage, is fantastic to see. And obviously we continue to have celebrating and sourcing local right at the heart of everything that we do. So 82% of our food was procured right here from Canterbury. And obviously now we've extended our reporting to reflect on the use of our third-party suppliers and contractors, so 70% as well. A few of those event highlights, it seems like forever ago really, but you know, particularly if you see the amount of activity in the Christchurch Town Hall, for example, 246 events there. That's a high utilisation of that venue, which is amazing to see, and just reiterates the value in that investment from the city in restoring and repairing the Christchurch Town Hall. Just incredible. Again, Apollo Project Stadium, you know, that venue has its constraints, but it has stood the test of time and it's certainly done us proud. So really getting much more diverse use of that venue. Great to see those Warriors sold out there a couple of times. It'll be awesome to have them back next year and obviously run out on the pitch at One New Zealand Stadium as well. And Wolfbrook Arena again, really high usage. So we are seeing great usage, great venue utilisation across all of our venues. And adding in that bit of mobile activity as well. So Sail GP was a fantastic addition to the year. And as we reflected on, I think in Q3 reporting was, you know, in March 2024, we did 20% of our annual revenue in that 1 month. So pretty awesome. But most importantly, what does that do outside of the venues? So 41.2 million of indirect and direct economic contribution to the city in FY 23-24. Now that comes from visitation to the venues, so from out of town about 28 million, as well as what we directly procure from local region, so 1.72 million, as well as that 11.34 in direct contribution to local suppliers. So collectively, that's a really impressive number, and wonderful to see that event ecosystem coming from the venues. Sustainability has been a huge focus for us, and just to highlight some of those environmental sustainability successes, we've had an 11% reduction in our carbon emissions from our baseline in FY 22-23. That's predominantly around waste and energy. Our refrigerant reporting will come in the latter stages of next year, but refrigerant is quite a small proportion of our carbon emissions. We've been replacing all of the lighting at Wolfbrook Arena to energy efficient lighting. As of today, that's about 97% complete now. We've established a reporting and monitoring framework. We've increased our ticket levy at Wolfbrook Arena to offset those waste collection and disposal costs particularly. And we've started that design work on replacing the diesel boilers at the arena, which contributes about 39% to our overall carbon footprint. Community, again, just like celebrating and sourcing local, is at the heart of everything that we do. Great to see for 23-24 that we've exceeded those targets again, and quite significantly. So we have a target to support community individuals and groups to the value of about 100,000 a year. That was 184,000 in 23-24. Now, our ability to do that comes from what we can generate in terms of revenue. So really good to see that we can continue to make sure that the venues are accessible to all members of our community. Client and guest experience, another one of our strategic pillars. So again, our client NPS targets and guest NPS targets are well exceeded, which sets a great platform for the future, really understanding what our clients and our guests value, as well as where we can improve. And to our financial performance, so obviously we do have a positive variance there when it comes to our operating income. Sale GP was a great addition to the year, but you will see that our EBITDA is behind budget there, and we have talked about the reasons for that. But those material contributions to that behind budget EBITDA are that 54% uplift in insurance that added an extra $1 million to our insurance bill for 23-24. The living wage was obviously at 9.9%, another up close to 7% this year. And we had some earlier than expected repairs and maintenance required at the stadium. Now, obviously we have an end-of-life report that informs, and we have a quarterly structural assessment. That end-of-life report informs essentially what we may or may not, based on a certain risk profile, need to invest in to keep that venue safe and operationally compliant. But we did have some things that came to their end of life earlier than expected, so we needed to invest that. And then our pre-opening stadium expenses. So we are continuing to meet all of those expenses, obviously without any revenue for the venue as yet. So I guess moving on to Q1 now, we take what we learnt in 23-24 and we take that into 24-25. What we are seeing is a slightly less volatile environment when it comes to those uncontrollable costs in the most. So when it comes to insurance, for example, we're seeing more like a 6% increase in insurance versus a 54% increase. So that's great, albeit coming from a much higher base, as well as utilities. You know, we had 25% increase in utilities last year. We're closer to 10. You know, so these things are starting to become less volatile, albeit those base costs are a bit higher. But as I've said, the living wage is also something that is continuing to, you know, to grow exponentially, really. And we have around 600 casual staff all paid the living wage, and that will grow to closer to 1,000 in the next 18 months as we prepare for the stadium. But what we are focused on is cost control, as well as focusing on revenue generation. Now, we don't want to do one thing and not the other, but essentially our focus is to generate more revenue, reduce our internal costs, and look to continue to reduce any support that we need from council. But we do acknowledge we've got large complex venues to manage, and some of those are older than others. But it certainly is our focus as we get into 24, 25, and always has been, but it's just been a little harder with the volatility of the economic environment in the last little while. So Q1, these highlights come before obviously submitting our formal Q1 performance report, but we thought important to talk to these now to give you a flavour of how the year is starting and shaping up. So again, we're really pleased to see the start of FY 24-25. So we've exceeded again those targets around event numbers, guest numbers, already 150,000 through the venues. We're continuing to procure 80% of our food locally, as well as just slightly ahead on those local suppliers and contractors. And similarly, pretty much in line with last year, so in totality across economic, indirect and direct economic impact, that's just over 7 million to the end of September. So again, great to see. And again, when it comes to community events and the value of those discounts, we are again on track to exceed both of those targets. Sustainability, this is consistent, but you'll see that we've now entered a new waste management partnership. We have waste management plans in place for all of our venues, and we're really pleased with that partnership, which commenced in October, and they'll continue to support us in diverting as much as we can with an 80% target from landfill. As I said earlier, 95, well, it's actually 97% now, I think, in terms of that lighting replacement, and now getting those sensors in to just make sure that we are being as energy efficient as we possibly can be. That monitoring framework for our refrigerants we will develop, and again, just continuing to plan that replacement of those diesel boilers. We won't look to do that until 26-27 because it will involve closing the arena for some time, and until the stadium opens, we won't have anywhere to displace any of those events. So it is important that we just balance that. We do regular pulse surveys of our team, and we did reflect on the last one in our Q3 reporting. This time we did our pulse check, actually focused on staff safety. We've had increasingly challenging behaviour from in-venue behaviour as well as outside of venue behaviour, and we've just wanted to make sure that we have the support in place for our staff to make sure they feel safe, feel supported, and if they don't, they know the tools and methods that they can use to resolve that, as well as making sure that we are mitigating any of those risks as much as we can. But we've got to ask the question. So as much as we do have those concerns, 86% of our staff do feel safe working at our venues, which is really, really good to hear. Doesn't take our eye off the ball, however. And 86% of our staff would recommend VO as a great place to work. So we like to hear that. Obviously, that's great for our reputation as an employer, but also great to know that our staff feel good about where they're working. And also just tracking along really well in terms of those NPS targets. So just a quick highlight on our preparations in terms of getting ready commercially and operationally for the stadium opening, only 18 months away, which is awesome. So corporate hospitality, we're still seeing a really, really high demand for corporate hospitality. I think our waiting list for suites, for example, of the 23 suites that we have is around 250, say. High demand, and so really, really, really exciting as we get into market in mid-2025. We have just concluded our ticketing services RFP, and we are now partnering with Ticketmaster. Now, our Ticketmaster partnership also includes content guarantees, so that gives us some security around our entertainment content for the next 5 years as a baseline, which is really awesome, and we're excited about that partnership. And you would have already seen some of those partnerships that we are announcing around, obviously the Warriors long-term partnership, the Phoenix now committing to playing here in Christchurch. And again, all that does is building guaranteed content at the stadium. All that does is really build that commercial confidence, and it underpins, obviously, our corporate hospitality offering as well. Naming rights is obviously, we confirmed that in July. And we have a range of other sponsorships and partnerships in the market, including the likes of Porridge. We have established an internal operator program to make sure that we are operationally ready and commercially ready. Now, that's made up of about 85 projects, so a fair amount to do, but we're confident that, we're well prepared and we will be ready. And once we get real confidence around, yes, we have confidence now in terms of we are on track in terms of that opening date until we, I think about March, April next year, really lock that in. We'll be able to start thinking about announcing what that event profile might look like and some of those launch activities. But I guess what I think is important to flag is when we think about an event series, what we want to do is underpin those decisions by kind of 4 key principles. So one is, let's get as many members of our community through their venue as possible and as soon as possible. Let's get as many eyeballs on the city as possible. Let's generate the most regional impact we can from that event series. And let's highlight and showcase the flexibility and multi-use functionality of this amazing venue, because they're the things that we should be celebrating, and it's not too far away. So in terms of Q1, we are a little behind in terms of our operating income, but what you'll see there is the reason for that is we had a couple of forecast events, one of them being a multi-event that didn't come to fruition. Obviously, it's not an exact science, but you'll see there our focus around stringent cost control and making some fundamental changes actually has delivered us a positive variance to budget with respect to our EBITDA. We have also now worked through our reforecast for the year and with some targets that we're setting around reducing some costs, including some of our event-related costs. We're forecasting around a $1.3 million saving in terms of our costs this year. But we are seeing some still volatility around some of those costs. Utilities have come down, but the likes of the living wage has continued to go up. So that's where we're starting to see where we need to make some of those savings. And we are, albeit not included in these numbers, we're going to be reporting those separately, and you'll see that when our quarterly report comes in, is the stadium pre-opening expenses. We're now running 2 separate P&Ls, so we can actually start. It was muddying the water in terms of our business as usual performance. Gosh, it's never ending, isn't it? Sorry, everyone. And just looking at Q2, 121 events, close to 160,000 guests. So the remainder of this year looks extraordinarily strong, and we're delighted to see the demand coming through the venues. And even the Christchurch Town Hall there, 61 events in Q2. It's great to see. And we've already talked about that, and that is just what we've already talked about, which just reminds you all of how we, our financial structure, so event activity, event income, offsetting those costs of asset management and maintenance, of which council operating support is also a contributor, $6.57 million obviously this year in terms of those asset management and maintenance costs. So subvention, operating support, and then what we contribute from our revenue all goes into that total. So that is well and truly enough from me. So we'll take any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very, very thorough.
I know.
Yanni.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing. Really amazing. And great to see so many different events and the high usage rate. These won't surprise you, as these are not new questions, but just sort of seem to be kind of a regular question. But given you've got unexpected costs at the temporary stadium, why would you not introduce a ticket levy to help offset some of that cost, given the cost pressures?
Yeah, so look, obviously those costs are not, well, they were unexpected in terms of the timing. They weren't unexpected in terms of whether they may or may not happen. Introducing a ticket levy now, in terms of the number of events remaining at the stadium, wouldn't have a material impact. It would contribute, I think we did the numbers, I think about 80,000 maybe, in terms of an additional revenue line. So for the amount of work to go into actually getting that levy in place, it just wouldn't have the material impact. We are preparing, obviously, for a ticket levy at the new stadium. Now, what we will do in terms of that ticket levy, one, it will offset operational costs, and two, it will also cover our ability to have integrated ticketing with public transport, to make sure public transport is free for any ticket holder at the stadium. So that should generate between about 700 to 1.2 million a year. So that's a material amount, but I think 1 year at Apollo Projects just wouldn't quite shift the dial in terms of those unexpected costs.
Right. As part of the fundraising, well, the funding of the new stadium, and thanks for giving us a list of kind of what you're doing. The one thing that seems to be missing is looking at selling off seats. It's, I know the Court Theatre's doing it. I know many stadiums around the world do it. Have you looked at an ability for the people that, came to council and said, please build a big stadium with a whole bunch of extra seats, looking at some sort of mechanism by the public or others can actually give more towards this project around particularly using the seating or the, it just seems like an obvious thing to be looking at.
Yeah, look, I think what's important to focus on at the minute is revenue generation. And part of that revenue generation, of which we are seeing quite significant upside, is the membership program. And selling seats actually complicates matters because we'll have a membership program, but also we don't own the content. So it's quite a different proposition when we think about selling seats like the Court Theatre to raise money versus actually being able to sell a membership program, and also based on what's not guaranteed content. Do you want to add anything to that, Danny?
Yeah, it is quite difficult from a stadium point of view. So let's say you're a Crusaders season member. You don't want to sponsor a seat per se or buy a seat, but that seat means everything to you. So when you go to the 7 games of Crusaders, you sit in your seat. So to have a default name on a seat is tough from a membership. Same with the Warriors. They sold a 2-game membership. They sold 8,000 members here as well. So it becomes a bit difficult with a transient venue hire system as well. Theatres, it does work really well. I completely agree, and I think it's an awesome initiative for the court. But from our point of view, how do we kind of get the most revenue out of that stadium, make it attractive to our venue hirers, and let people invest with confidence, whether it's corporate hospitality or seats and bowls. So yeah, we have had discussions about it, but it does come with complications from a venue hirer and what their commercial proposition is, particularly membership, to be honest.
Right. And is there any other work happening? I'm just getting a bit confused about who's leading the discussions with our neighbouring councils, ECAN, maybe MPs around some sort of regional levy. Who's leading that work, and what's the best way for us to get visibility of it at a political level?
Yeah, I'm happy either way.
Look, I think that's really a council talking about the other councils in particular. That's a council to council. We're very happy to be supporting any initiatives that the council might take with other councils. But our role is not to get into that space where it's council to council discussions. And I guess there are 2 elements to that. There's ongoing operating expenses, primarily, and there may even be some capital contributions, but they are certainly council to council discussions. We're very happy and have committed to support those, but we can't lead those.
Right. Because it seems to go, we approach them, they say, thanks, but we haven't been involved and we're not engaged in decision making and in the decisions.
Okay, so Yanni, so you got a different question?
Well, maybe it's a question of staff. Is there a way that we can get some sort of coherent framework around those approaches?
Yes, I think that's something we'll come back on. Yeah. We'll welcome.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cool.
so
Thank you.
Mark, and then Jake, then Andre.
Yeah, mine was sort of teasing at a similar point. I heard you mention ticket levy earlier around One New Zealand Stadium. Is there any thought to potentially a Christchurch resident discount, so that we basically have almost a levy on the out-of-towners to help contribute towards the stadium operating or capital?
Yeah.
Or is that something we need to follow up with our staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We've had various discussions with it. As Caroline alluded to, we have changed ticketing provider from Ticketek to Ticketmaster. So that only came into effect on the 1st of October, but we have had that discussion. Is there potential? There's a levy from a stadium point of view, which is separate to this conversation, but also if it was right to have, if you're based in these postcodes, it would not charge a levy versus out of city as well. So yeah, that's something that we have discussed that will carry on next year as well, and would close it off during this financial year 24-25, whether it's viable, what are the workarounds, and probably what are the global trends, because people find a way to beat those systems. Yeah. So I think the levies are a no-brainer in terms of out-of-town residents contributing. Yeah, that's an interesting discussion that we want to know more about before we go, is it viable or is it not?
Okay, Jake, and then Andre.
Hey, I went for a walk around the stadium a couple of weeks ago, and I looked at those retail spaces on the east side, and someone mentioned that their hospitality wasn't going to be allowed for in those spaces because of the food and beverage offering inside the stadium. But then I thought, well, I can't imagine who would take up the opportunity to fill those spaces out, and if we're wanting to activate the site, hard to imagine how you activate a site without food and beverage. Can you offer any commentary as to why that decision and how fixed that decision is?
So firstly, that decision isn't made. It's not fixed. The future use of those spaces is still up for conversation.
Cool.
What we've done is we've worked through a process to value those spaces, to understand in a commercial environment what would they be worth. They have some constraints. Obviously, they're on the east side. There's no car parking, that type of constraint.
That struck me too.
But I think what we now understand is where they kind of sit commercially, what they could be used for, and then think about what those principles are. Do we want to drive visitation? Okay. How do we want to? So no, those decisions are not made. Obviously, they are shell and core though. So the services and all those things are not in them. They were never intended to be. So up until such time as we sort of decide on and perhaps seek some interest from the market as to who might, like to use those spaces. That's kind of
cool. Oh, thank you for that. And yeah, just take it, I guess, from me, but I'm sure others will feel the same, that if we were to have a little bit of a lower commercial return for good proper activation, then that would be something we would want to look at least.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like maybe a bit of a crossroads there on the buy a seat, because buy a seat doesn't necessarily have to mean you're buying your space at said certain seat. But even the concept of someone having their name on a seat somewhere, I feel like it would appeal. So I guess my question is, if you'd still consider that. I mean, it's if you're buying your name on a seat, but not deciding where it goes, and that it doesn't give you the rights to sit there or whatever, it would still generate money, but make people feel invested in it. And surely, like I'd do it. A lot of small businesses would. A lot of people are just excited to stay, and they'd do it. And they could. I mean, it's just names, right? It's like, surely it's easy to do and would generate money.
Definitely an interesting one. And yeah, there's two sides to it as well. I mean, you kind of imagine girl buys a seat. So I'm a Crusaders season member or a Canterbury Rugby one, and I love my seat. It's really important to me. That's the top reason why people are members. They feel a connection to that part of a stadium. And if you try and move them, it's problematic. So yeah, the flip side to that comment is, if it's got Gil Cox on it, and I turn up as a Crusaders member, it's kind of a little bit.
But I'm not talking about it reserving your space.
But the name on the seat.
So I've had the same, for example, Warrior season ticket for a few years now, same seat. I couldn't care less about what business name's behind me or what name or who is, still sponsor their name to help support the stadium. That's sort of what I'm saying. It doesn't necessarily have to be about who's sitting where. But just to have your name somewhere in that stadium, I feel would mean a lot to people.
Yeah, look, I think what we do is, obviously that's on the one consideration. There might be other, it could be pavings outside. It could be, I guess it's also really important that we understand the full financial model, and what we want to do next year is actually take you all through the financial model, which will be about March, April, where we'll have a bit more certainty. And what you'll then appreciate is, I think firstly it's really important to understand the need, because and similarly with the discussions, I guess, and considering what that council to council conversation looks like is, let's first identify the need, if there is one, because there are upsides, and in terms of the commercial model, it looks strong. And even based on the current forecasts, it washes its face operationally, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's important that we get it right instead of, I think it's important to look at all these ideas, absolutely, but let's pick off the best ones.
Yeah, and probably just to close that one off, I think virtual is a really big opportunity. So yeah, physical absolutely as well. But for example, to be a member of One New Zealand Stadium and you're member 14, for example, that connection is really important. You get benefits and you're kind of a foundation member. So we've got a few as part of our financial modelling that kind of fall under that as well. So yeah, virtual, without a doubt, there will be a connection where people can join. And then physical, we can kind of dig into it a bit more as well.
But I guess what I'm saying is, like, around a stadium, you might have a business who has sponsored that sign at that part of the stadium, whatever. I guess what I'm saying is there's 30,000 individual sponsorship opportunities. So it might be that some businesses just want their name on a small part of, 500 seats or whatever it might be. I just sort of feel like there's 30,000 opportunities there. And it's like, whether you need it or not, why wouldn't you take that? This is, I guess, what I'm trying to...
I guess we've got to work through the modelling, which is, if that is something we progress, what are the possible compromises? Because there could be some. So there are obviously other parts of the stadium that we are looking at sponsorship opportunities, like stands, for example, like lounges, obviously other advertising that's not in scope at the minute. So it's not off the table by any stretch. I think we've just got to work through it as an option.
Thank you.
So I guess what you're hearing from that is there are some ideas that the team would like at least talked about when we come back. So that's the point of these. Does anyone else have any more questions? Yanni?
So I was just wondering, it'd also be really good at some stage to get an understanding of what's happening with the balance of the precinct. There's obviously been, land that we've acquired, and I just don't quite understand what the strategy is around that whole site working well together, or what the other possible development opportunities might be.
Look, we're really open to having that conversation with the council around what those the future of those sites could be, because we'd love to obviously be part of those conversations to be able to create that entertainment precinct. So that we'd love to have that conversation.
It just seems while we've got work and contractors doing stuff, it would be better to have those conversations earlier rather than later, so that if there was any synergy with the contractors, it would make a lot more sense. And the final question from me was just in terms of the naming rights. Has there been any discussions around the information and the data from people that attend? I know in the past when we looked at sponsorship for the Tūranga with Spark, one of the considerations was access to the data of the people that were attending.
Yeah, definitely. We've done quite a bit of work. I mean, it does sort of come back to who opts in. So if you go to One New Zealand Stadium, you use the Wi-Fi when available, and what rights you're happy to hand over. Just like when you buy a ticket, similar concept. You're happy to get remarketed. So yeah, there will be data available. It just depends on what the consumer's comfortable with. I mean, how we kind of repurpose that as well. But it's a big opportunity from a connectivity point of view.
Maybe not today, but can we get some information?
Yep. So I think that it's good points have been raised, and if you can just bring it back when you're next in. Andre, did you have another question? Then I'm keen. Tyler's going to move it, and Phil's going to second it.
I've just seen Eden Park realise that they're too limited for how many concerts they can have. They've gone from 0 to 6, now 6 is not enough. Like a core stadium in Sydney's just gone from 6 to 20. I mean, I've been wondering this for years if we've got enough, basically. Like, if those moves and those stadiums made you start to think more about this?
Look, we've got the ability to, we've got 15 under the designation at the minute. Now that's 6 loud and 9 medium, and then an unlimited number under that. So we're pretty confident that that's enough at the minute. That's actually quite generous, and it's probably the most generous by way of numbers across New Zealand.
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, if Eden Park's got a limit of 6 and they weren't able to get Taylor Swift or whatever because of that limit, like, could Taylor Swift have fit into one of those 9 not so loud? Is what I'm trying to get me
I don't know
head
if Taylor
around.
Swift didn't go because of that limit.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't about that. You can always ask for an exemption.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, if that was, would Taylor Swift been allowed here because we've got those 9 quieter that are allowed? Or would that still have been over that decibel limit and then we're in sort of the same spot as those other stadiums.
It's probably more whether it's financially viable for the promoter, but if it is and they come here, they can make the noise work. So the decibel is really important. It's really easy what they have to do from a sound desk point of view.
Yeah.
But you're right, if Eden Park are at capacity, a promoter has to move somewhere with 15 concerts. That's a great competitive advantage for Ōtautahi Christchurch.
Yeah, but would they, if they thought there's a decibel limit and we've got this band, would that potentially put them off coming and having to make it work within those decibel limits and those 9 instead of the 6?
Yeah, it just varies by act, to be honest. A promoter absolutely would make that call and go, does it
Yeah.
stack up, and can we keep to those decibel limits as
Yeah.
well? And that would just be by type of musician and how particular the act is.
Yeah.
But you're right, would it be on the table? Potentially. I wouldn't think it would be a showstopper, though.
Okay, so we're good. I think we're keen to move on. So it's been moved and seconded. Thank you very much for coming in for that. It's really useful.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Look, I just want to reflect on what Venues Ōtautahi is about, and it's about providing people with great experiences. That starts with our staff on the ground, and it builds up through various levels of casual staff to management people through to the senior management team. And, from a board perspective, we just want to acknowledge the work that every one of those people put in and the focus they've got on giving people a great time. So I just think we need to acknowledge that and thank those people, because they give up a lot of time to do this, whether they're a casual staff or whether they're at the management team.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, so that's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much for that. And Gil, don't go away. I think you're up next. With a different hat on. So. Great.